In my 35 years on the bench here in Providence, Rhode Island, I have made one promise to myself that I have never broken. Not once, not for anyone. Every single person who stands at that podium gets the same judge, the same eyes, the same questions, the same standard. It does not matter what your last name is. It does not matter who your father is. It does not matter how many people in this city know your face. If you leave a comment right now telling me what equal justice means to you, I promise you I will read it. Because what I'm about to tell you is a story about exactly that, and about a young woman who walked into my courtroom expecting one thing and walked out having received something far more valuable. Her name was Serena. She was 20 years old, and she walked through those doors with the particular posture of someone who has grown up being recognized. Not arrogance exactly, more like a deep-seated comfort with being the center of a room. She was dressed beautifully, not extravagantly, but beautifully. And flanking her like a pair of well-dressed bookends were two people I recognized immediately. Not personally, but professionally. One was a private attorney, the kind whose suit telegraphs his hourly rate before he opens his mouth. The other was a publicist. I have been doing this long enough to know a publicist when I see one. They carry a specific kind of quiet alertness, like someone permanently poised to manage a narrative. Subscribe to this channel right now if you want the full story from inside my courtroom, because what happened in the next 30 minutes is something I've thought about almost every week since. The case on paper was modest. 3 unpaid parking violations totaling $210 accumulated over 4 months in downtown Providence. Failure to appear for the original hearing date. A second notice sent, also ignored. By the time Serena stood before me, the matter had been escalating for the better part of 6 months. The attorney had filed paperwork requesting a dismissal on procedural grounds, a technicality involving the timing of the second notice. It was a reasonable legal argument. I had seen it made before. But before we got to the legal argument, I wanted to understand the person. I looked at Serena carefully. She was young and poised, but there was something underneath the composure that I couldn't quite name yet, something that was working very hard. I have learned, after all these years, that the performance people give at that podium tells me almost as much as the words they use. "Serena," I said, "I see you have representation here today. That is certainly your right. But before your attorney addresses the court, I'd like to ask you a few questions directly. Is that all right with you?" She glanced at her attorney. He gave the smallest nod. "Of course, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was steady, practiced even. "These 3 tickets," I said, 4 months, all in the downtown area. "Were you living in Providence during this time, or visiting?" "Living here, Your Honor. I'm a student at RISD." She paused. "Rhode Island School of Design." "I know what RISD is," I said, and I let a small smile into my voice. "I have been in this city my entire life." A few people in the gallery chuckled softly. "So you were here, you received the tickets, you received the notices. Why did you not come in to address them?" Another glance at the attorney. He started to lean forward. "I'd like to hear from Serena," I said, not unkindly but clearly. She straightened slightly. I was busy, Your Honor, with school, and there was a lot going on personally, and I honestly thought my assistant had handled it." Hit that like button right now if you caught what I caught in that sentence, because right there, right in that moment, was where this case became something more than a parking ticket. "Your assistant," I set down my pen. "You have a personal assistant?" I asked. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you delegated the handling of these notices to your assistant?" I thought I had. "Yes." I nodded slowly. I was not angry. I was not going to perform disapproval for the gallery. But I was going to be honest, the way I believe a judge should always be honest, because that is the only thing I have to offer that is truly worth anything. "Let me ask you something, Serena, and I want you to understand that I am asking this because I genuinely want to help you, not to embarrass you." I paused. "Do you understand that these violations are your legal responsibility, not your assistant's, yours?" A beat of silence. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand that when you received a formal notice from this court, a legal document, the appropriate response was to come in and address it personally, or at the very minimum to verify that it had been addressed?" "Yes," she said, more quietly this time. "Good." I looked at the attorney. "Now, Counselor, I've read your motion. Walk me through the procedural argument." He did. It was competent. It was well prepared. The timing of the second notice did have a technical irregularity, a gap of 2 days beyond the standard window. Under a strict reading of the statute, it created a narrow but legitimate procedural question. I listened. I considered it. I wrote 2 notes on the pad in front of me, and then I looked up. Before I tell you what I decided, let me tell you what I was thinking, because this is the part that matters most. Share this video right now with someone who believes that rules should apply to everyone equally, because what was about to happen in my courtroom was a test of exactly that principle. Here is what I was thinking. I was thinking about a woman named Patricia who had stood at that same podium 6 weeks earlier. Patricia was 61 years old and worked the overnight shift at a hospital laundry facility. She had one unpaid parking ticket, $35, from a meter that had expired while she was inside attending a medical appointment for her own heart condition. She had no attorney, she had no assistant, she had a folded piece of paper with the appointment confirmation printed on it that she had carried in her purse for 3 weeks before her court date. She stood there alone and she told me the truth, and I dismissed the fine without a second's hesitation. And now I had a 20-year-old with a private attorney and a publicist and a procedural technicality that, if I honored it, would erase $210 in obligations for a young woman who had, by her own admission, delegated her legal responsibilities to household staff. Let me tell you something, my friends. The law is not a buffet. You do not get to take the parts that serve you and leave the parts that don't. And a technicality in my courtroom is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, and it is a legal question that I evaluate in the context of the entire situation before me. I looked at Serena. I looked past the attorney, past the publicist, past the carefully maintained composure. Serena, I said, I'm going to ask you one more question, and I want you to answer it yourself, from your own heart, not through counsel. I leaned forward just slightly. Why do you think you're here today? She blinked. It was clearly not the question she had prepared for. She stopped, started again. Because I have unpaid parking violations, Your Honor. That is why the paperwork brought you here, I said. But why do you think you are really here? What is this moment asking of you? The silence that followed was one of the most interesting silences I have experienced in 35 years on this bench. I watched her face move through several things in rapid succession. Confusion, then a flash of something that looked like irritation, then something slower and more genuine that rose up underneath it all. Subscribe to this channel right now, because the answer she gave me in the next 30 seconds is something I want every young person in this country to hear. I think, she said slowly, that I've been expecting things to be easier for me than they are for other people. She said it quietly, almost to herself. And I think that's not fair. I sat back. I let that land. You're right, I said. It's not fair, and I appreciate you saying it. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story turns in a direction I did not fully anticipate. The attorney, to his credit, was watching his client carefully, and I could see in his expression that he was recalibrating, that the young woman standing at that podium had just gone significantly off script from whatever they had prepared together. I picked up my pen. Counselor, I am going to deny the motion for dismissal. The procedural question you've raised is narrow, and while I acknowledge the technical argument, I find that the circumstances of this case do not support using that technicality to erase the underlying obligations. I paused. However, I am going to do something that I do for anyone who comes into this courtroom and demonstrates genuine self-reflection. I looked at Serena. I'm going to reduce the total fine by 30% and waive all late fees and court costs. The adjusted amount due is $147. I'm going to give you 30 days to pay it. Her attorney opened his mouth slightly. He had been expecting either a full dismissal or a fight. He had not been expecting this middle ground delivered this calmly. And Serena, I continued, I want to say something to you that I say to very few people who come before me with representation, because usually the attorney does most of the talking and the person standing there does very little of the actual thinking. I let that settle for just a moment. What you said just now, about fairness, about expecting things to be easier, that took courage, real courage. Don't waste that insight. It is worth considerably more than a $200 parking fine. Hit that like button if you believe that accountability, freely chosen, is one of the most powerful things a human being can demonstrate, because that is what I witnessed at that podium, and it changed the entire atmosphere of my courtroom for the rest of the morning. But here's the part I have not told you yet. Here's the part that turned this from a notable moment into one of the cases I carry with me. As Serena turned to step away from the podium, something happened that I had not planned for. A woman in the gallery stood up. She was perhaps 55, simply dressed, and she had clearly been waiting for a different case. She had a folder in her hands and the look of someone who had been there for over an hour. She was not connected to Serena in any way that I knew of. She said loud enough for the room to hear, "Thank you, Judge. Thank you for treating her the same." I looked at her. "Ma'am, I've been watching this show for years," she said, "and I brought my daughter here today so she could see it in person, so she could see that it's real. She pressed her hand briefly to her chest. My daughter is 18. I wanted her to see this. In the third row, I saw a teenage girl with wide eyes looking between her mother and me. Inspector Quinn was watching the whole thing with that expression he gets, that quiet, satisfied look that tells me the work we do here is landing the way it is supposed to. Let me tell you something, my friends. I have been a judge since before that teenage girl was born. I have presided over thousands and thousands of cases. Some of them have been broadcast on Caught in Providence and watched by millions of people around the world. And still, there are mornings when someone says something in that room that stops me completely. That cuts right through the robe and the bench and the 35 years of experience and reaches the part of me that is simply a man from Providence who grew up believing that fairness is the cornerstone of everything. That was one of those mornings. Before I tell you how this story ended, share this video with someone in your life who needs to be reminded that no name, no reputation, no amount of money changes what is right. Because the ending matters, and I want you to stay with me. I looked at that mother and her daughter for a moment. Then I said something I do not always say from the bench, because I try to keep the courtroom moving efficiently, and I am careful about turning proceedings into speeches. But that morning I said, "Bring your daughter to the podium." A murmur through the gallery. Inspector Quinn raised an eyebrow, not in opposition, just in the pleasant surprise of someone watching something unscripted unfold. The teenage girl came forward. She stood at the podium where moments before Serena had stood. She looked up at me with the expression of someone who had just been called on in class and wasn't sure if she had the right answer. "What's your name?" I asked. "Danny," she said. "Danny, how old are you?" 18. "You came here today with your mother. Do you know why she brought you?" She glanced at her mother, then back at me. She said she wanted me to see what real justice looks like. I paused for a moment. My throat was doing what it does sometimes. That tightening that comes when something hits the part of me that is still my father's son, still the boy from the old neighborhood who learned everything he needed to know about life from people who had very little except their integrity. "Let me tell you something, Danny," I said. "In this room, I try every single day to do one thing above everything else. I try to treat every person the way I would want to be treated if our positions were reversed. That is it. That is the whole philosophy. It is not complicated, but it requires something from you that no amount of money or privilege can substitute for." I looked at her carefully. "It requires that you actually believe that every person in front of you is as real and as valuable as you are. Do you understand what I mean?" "Yes, sir," she said, and I believed her. "Good. Now go sit down and take care of your mother. She's a wise woman." I smiled at her. "God bless you both." The gallery applauded. Not thunderously, it never is in my courtroom, because this is a place of law, not performance, but warmly, genuinely, the way people applaud when they recognize something true. Subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed a moment like this? A moment when justice felt exactly the way it is supposed to feel? I want to hear your stories, because mine is not finished yet. 3 months later, I received a letter. It was written on Arias D. Stationery, the Rhode Island School of Design. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, the way young people write when they are trying to say something important and want to get the words exactly right. It was from Serena. She wrote that she had paid the fine within the first week. She wrote that she had let her personal assistant go, not because of anything I said, but because she had decided she needed to start managing her own responsibilities, including the ones that felt small. She wrote that she had been thinking about what she had said at the podium about expecting things to be easier, and that she had talked about it with her father. And then she wrote something that I read 3 times. She wrote, "My father is known for his music, but I think the most important thing he ever taught me is that a voice only matters if it says something true. I think I'm starting to understand what that means." I set the letter down on my desk. I looked out the window at Providence, this city I have lived in and loved my entire life, this city my parents came to as immigrants believing that America was a place where what you did mattered more than who you were born to be. They were right. They were absolutely right. And on the best days, on the days when a 20-year-old woman finds her way to an honest sentence at a courtroom podium, or when a mother brings her daughter to see justice in action, or when a teenage girl stands where hundreds of adults have stood before her and receives one simple truth about human dignity, on those days I know with every part of my being that this work is the most important work I have ever done. My father worked with his hands. He did not speak often, but when he did, the words were worth waiting for. He used to say, in Italian in his quiet way, that respect is the only currency that never loses its value. Rispetto. I have spent 35 years trying to spend it wisely. What choice did I have? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my position Would you have honored the technicality and dismissed the case? Would you have been harder? There is no wrong answer, but I want to hear your thinking, because justice is not a destination, it is a conversation, and you are part of it. And share this story if you know a young person who is still figuring out who they want to be, because the most important thing I can tell you is this: who you are is revealed not in the easy moments, but in the ones when you choose honesty over convenience and accountability over escape. That is the beginning of character, and character, my friends, is everything. God bless you. Take care of yourselves, take care of the people around you, and stay close, because what came through my courtroom doors the following Thursday morning made everything I thought I knew about second chances feel like it was only the beginning.